Before we begin, I would like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my teachings and work at Del Seaton Medical Center. Any discussions we have on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and in no way connected to Del Seaton Medical Center.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Life of Flow. Today, here with my amigo, Dr. Lucas Ferrer, Miguel Montero Baker, and we have the absolute pleasure of sharing this hour with a colleague, a great esteemed colleague of ours, Dr. Shreya Sheth. She is a cardiologist at the #1 cardiovascular center for pediatric care in America, Texas Children's Hospital. And she's going to be discussing today a little bit about performance rounds and what have they learned from aviation safety and how they apply that to the care of overly complex case scenarios. So I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. Lucas, we should just jump into it.
Let's do it.
Two vascular surgeons walk into a bar and come out with a podcast. We are talking everything vascular and not. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast. All right, so I'm really excited about today, Lucas. I'll tell you, as we've been working on this project for a few months now, thinking about the people we want to bring on board, it's kind of cool to start understanding your network, right? And you start going through all these people that somehow you've interacted with.
Yeah.
And then you start thinking, who can I have a really cool conversation that people may want to listen?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't know how that's been for you, but anyway, today we are incredibly happy to hear that our good friend and colleague, Dr. Shreya Sheth, said yes to this experiment, by the way, because it is an experiment for us.
First episode.
Yeah, I mean, episodio uno.
Episodio uno.
Bienvenidos. And so we'll see where it goes. We are certainly very excited with this. Not to create a monologue on the front end here, but I think it's important for you because you don't know Shreya.
No,
right?
I don't know. Yeah, so
And
why don't you give us a little intro?
Yeah, so Shreya, Dr. Shreya Sheth, Dr. Lucas Ferrer, vascular surgeon here in Austin. She's a cardiologist in Texas Children in Houston in the medical center. And I met Shreya indirectly through my wife. My wife works at TCH and she's involved in quality. And of course, I get all that indirect stuff that happens at home and all these Zoom meetings that now you're inevitably involved in, right? Because the world has now become incredibly invasive. So everybody's involved with everybody's stuff at home and your Zoom makes it a Zoom of the family. Yeah. I've heard a lot of what you do, but how about you just give a high level, Shreya, of what it is that you do and at work, and then I'll kind of back up and understand a little bit more about you. But maybe we'll start by saying what it is that this project you do is a little bit about for people that don't necessarily even know about medicine.
For sure. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm very honored to be the first guest on this show. I feel like I should be thanking you all for having me here for sure. This is very exciting to hang out over Zoom. Most of the time we're all business on these things. So that's great. So here at Texas Children's, I am the director for quality and safety for our Texas Children's Heart Center. So I'm a cardiologist by training, a pediatric cardiologist. My first round of training was in general pediatrics, which was amazing. Although I very quickly realized I'm not the person that should be advising anyone on sleep training. And then from there, my background is in just my undergraduate degree is in engineering and sort of the plumbing of cardiology and especially congenital cardiology, where often things are connected in weird ways and you got to figure out how to reconnect the system so it works. That was really attractive to me. And so I did a cardiology fellowship after pediatric residency and then did an additional year, which a lot of us do. Mine was focused on imaging. So I do everything from fetal cardiology, babies inside of mamas, all the way out to just under adults. I don't see adults anymore. And we take care of a wide spectrum of disease. And that's another thing that's really attractive. You see kids that have a little thing and then are healthy. You see lots of kids that maybe have something but are healthy. And then you see some really, really sick kids. So it's a huge spectrum of disease. There's outpatient, inpatient care, all sorts of procedural subspecialties within cardiology. And the other thing that's lovely is that you almost never work solo. You almost always work as a team with other specialists. So Here at TCH, we're a very large center for what we do. We work with a big team of cardiac anesthesiologists, a big team of cardiac ICU doctors, are, of course, cardiothoracic surgeons who really rewire the plumbing, and then cardiologists, as well as all of the other groups that work within our inpatient spaces, like pharmacists, respiratory therapists, and everybody's here kind of with this one goal to take care of kids with hearts that aren't working so well and help make them better and get them home. And so I think that teamwork part was something that I was really kind of attracted to in pediatric cardiology, because you have like so much real like depth of specialty knowledge, but everybody has to try and figure out how to get all the pieces together for the patient. And that kind of like was a pretty easy segue into kind of where my job is now, because I like the processes. I like to figure out how do we get all of these people doing their very subspecialized job to really line up really well for our patients to get the best care that they need. And so that kind of aspect of processes, quality, patient safety within kind of our in and outpatient units, that was really kind of interesting to me. And so fairly early in my career, I think I started to gravitate towards like bigger picture quality and safety work for pediatric cardiology patients.
So Shreya, let me interrupt you real quick. So we're talking about high complexity clinical pathways, right? You don't necessarily think of it, because I'd like to, when I think as a vascular surgeon, we don't necessarily have, I think, incredibly complex long-term paths of multi-elemental care, in the sense that I think of high complexity of, or maybe we do, I don't know. We have, let's say, heart failure team, and some cancer care, and maybe transplant units, right? Transplant tends to be a very complex group of patients. Congenital heart tends to be a very complex, right? You have PULM, you have cards, you have ICU, you have surgery, et cetera. So anything that you can relate to that has so many intricate variables in what we do?
I think limb salvage suits should be that, but the way the incentives are structured kind of prevents it in most places, because obviously it's, everything goes into that, and it would be to have degree of complexity, but maybe complex aortic. Maybe I don't do complex aortics on a regular basis.
I don't necessarily see the.
Is trauma a little bit like that?
Nah, I don't know.
I'm trying to think.
Maybe it just
maybe.
My
trauma colleagues are gonna
feel like in trauma, it's whoever's up at 2 a.m. and.
No, I think they manage, obviously, like somebody can come in with multiple injuries, and you have a cohort of people managing different things at the same time, and you need to kind of wrangle that in a cohesive way. And there is some art to that.
It's fast paced, right? There's a lot of acute decision making that has to happen on the spot.
Yeah.
So I guess so. Yeah. I would say trauma, heart failure, certain transplant surgeries, congenital heart abnormalities. And I am actually accepting your comment. I think we can add limb preservation.
I think so.
Because you're talking about diabetology, nutrition, prosthetics, podiatry, vascular care, cardiology care.
That's what it should be.
Exactly. Right. And so, but anyway, this is going to be really interesting, because as vascular surgeons, why in the world can we not have what they have, right? That level of organization and detail. And like you said, I think the alignment, but maybe we can land on that a little bit later, but the alignment of the structure of the healthcare and how you get incentivized and how the pay structures happen, and a lot of those, which I don't think is a huge deal, Shreya, when you work in an academic large facility, right? It's more like, hey, you negotiate, here's your deal, here's your salary. And then from then on, it's more like you're working focused on the patient. It's not necessarily, there's not that thing in the back of your mind, although I'm sure the administratives love bringing that up of how many RVUs you're producing.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. So I think I am lucky in academics to be tied, and as a non-proceduralist, so that maybe it's different for like cath docs and EP docs and stuff. But I, as a non-proceduralist in academics, am a little bit lucky to not have to be tied to not that I'm not held to an RVU standard, but I am not as worried about my production, which gives me the space to do kind of like other things. Specifically in my job, I do a lot of administrative time and a lot of teaching. And I get to do that because I'm in academics, and nobody's like, hey, how many RVUs did you produce today? it's always a conversation. I think,
It's
again,
an inevitable conversation.
we all
And
have partnerships with administrators who have needs that are sometimes different from our needs. But
Can I
course.
ask you about something a little more kind of meta? So you have a background in engineering. So I understand your kind of proclivity to processes and such, but then you did medicine. I think medicine, as much as we say it's a science, it's an art, really. I mean, it's judgment, and you know, for me, one study doesn't change what I do. It informs what I do, but my experience and my the people that have taught me was inform what I do. So how do you bring those two things together? Because I very much gravitate to the art of it. That's kind of why I wake up every day. I I the process of it, sometimes I feel like it infringes on the art of it. So how do you balance those two things?
yeah, I'll agree. I mean, I think in medicine, we call that a little bit like systems engineering, right? So it's
Mhm.
you're taking kind of the context in which you have to work. I have this hospital and we have this number of beds and I have to see this many patients in clinic and generate this many RVUs. And then you're taking that human aspect, which like, this is my area of expertise. This is how I like to interact with my patients. Here's the standard of care that I want to hold myself to. Here's the learning that I do with like new research studies. And then how you bridge the gap between those two or like make them work cohesively together. I think that's where quality and process improvement lives. It's like, I know what I want as my standard of care. I know the research studies. I know sort of the best practice models. I know what I bring to the table with my own personality and my background and how I relate to patients. And then here is the kind of hard area in which I work, like my space, my time, my RVUs, my culture in my hospital for what's important and how much I can do for patients, et cetera, what the capacity is of my units, what I have for resources in terms of other ancillary services. And then you put those things together. So what I loved about kind of quality and process improvement for the beginning is that it looks a little different everywhere, but the principles are kind of the same. And so what you're trying to do is get the best out of the human to sort of coax the best out of the system and then really get the best care for the patient. Sounds
Yeah.
a little hope.
Is the concept of over optimization as a kind of detrimental force something that you guys think about when you come in? Because I feel like sometimes you put in a person to do a specific task in the goal of optimizing one specific thing, but that person doesn't see the forest that sees the tree. And I don't know, that's something I think I've kind of was reading it in a book, and it made a lot of sense one morning when I was, driving to work. Is that something that's thought about? Because I feel like that kind of like leads, I think there's some truth to over optimizing can lead to the opposite effect, and it actually probably leads to a lot of like the unsatisfaction that doctors feel when
And
they
even
work in a
patients.
hospital, or even patients. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're optimizing sort of a doctor's time for RVUs, then what you're doing is taking away from your ability to kind of really bond and talk to the patient, really win them over and try and get them to do the best thing for their care. I think that is where healthcare differs from like aviation and industrial engineering. It's that the human factor is so important, and you're taking these people, doctors, pharmacists, respiratory therapists, who are truly experts in their purview, but need to be able to work together. So I think over optimization is the thing. I also think like it's really easy. We talk a lot here about over standardization. And I think one thing that's like important to understand in kind of quality and process improvement and optimizing these systems is that you're doing it for the most part, so that when you deviate, you do it for a really good reason and you expect those deviations. So if I say I'm making a protocol for I don't know, vascular plugs after cath procedures, and I'm like, okay, well, these are the plugs that you have to use, and it has to be done with this kind of ultrasound guidance, and you have to document it this way. What you end up doing is sort of sometimes over protocolizing things that you want people to get a little creative about when they need to, because that's the expertise that they understand. So I don't want to limit the devices you can use if you know that none of those are going to fit where you need them to fit. I obviously don't do this part for a living, you can tell. but so there is that. I mean, there's a sense that like, administration wants doctors optimized to the nth degree, or we have to have these systems running on, but you can't do that with humans, right? And medicine, like you said, is such an art that you have to, like, the humane part of medicine has to have some room. And I think people are pretty conscious. It's easy to get cynical in what we do sometimes, I think, because it looks so different than it did decades ago, and it will look different in decades. But
the thing is that when you're working with teams, and I mean, this is, I'm sure I know Lucas very well. Lucas is the kind of guy that, he'll go into the OR, he'll be very knowledgeable ahead of time, and he goes in there and things go south and he just wings it, right? I mean, he's like, I've got this depth of knowledge and I'm in this problem and I'm winging it and I'm going to get this guy out. I'm going to get this patient, or in your case, I'm going to get this kid off the table, right? But that I don't think that's threatened by having performance-based systematic approach.
Well, it's threatened.
No, well, but I disagree in a way, because
every day.
I think that,
yeah. So I would call that a suboptimal.
I'd love your comments, because the question is, you're not curtailing your surgeons from doing what they have to do. It's more about, hey, the organization and the synchrony that has to happen for that patient that came into the ED, for that ultrasound to happen, for that echo to be happening at the same time that those labs are happening, for there being no, so that machine is oiled. And there's moments where the wheels are off, and you got to take care of that patient regardless.
I completely agree. But the thing is that you can't get people to shut off that, because I think that has, for me personally, that has no place in how I conduct a procedure, right? So it has no place in the decision I make as for this problem. What we do is a lot by feel. We're looking at a two-dimensional image and thinking in 3 dimensions, taking feedback with our hands. So I make decisions sometimes by how it feels. I think for this, I want this wire because it feels right.
But that doesn't remove the fact that patient needs a heparin drip,
no, of
needs to
course.
go to the ICU.
But the thing is the mentality.
Everything needs to happen.
Yeah, but the thing is the mentality.
Are set up so you can get the wire that you need, right? So I think when we design safe systems, we design systems to control as many things as you can so that you're able to make the best decision in that time and you've got what you need.
No, 100%.
So you design systems to be able to accommodate the human workaround, because honestly, if you look at sort of what happens in a hospital and you look at say a case from start to beginning, you will see, if you analyze it, so many times where someone was like, "Ooh, doesn't feel right," and then changed the course of that patient's care, right?
Yeah.
Not because they had some protocol telling them to, but sometimes it's better to not put those things into policy necessarily, that people have to, right? So I think there's a little bit of a misnomer that protocols mean that every decision is made for you and there's no deviation from that decision. Yeah. Some things need to be protocolized so that you have equipment that you need. You have sort of an expected pathway for 80% of these patients to go down. But the protocol that doesn't work is the one that dictates care so tightly that there's no ability for humans to accommodate in there. You guys know as well as I do, no two patients are exactly alike. And even if they are alike, they go into these systems and can get knocked off a pathway. It's like Plinko, right? Yeah. And so the part of the human interaction with that system is getting that Plinko ball back on the path that you wanted to, so your end bucket is the good outcome. And I think that's where safety science comes in. You want to be able to have humans, which honestly a lot of times are the best part of the system, because they're resilient and they can change paths and they can accommodate to make up for the places where the system lacks. Your goal in sort of healthcare improvement is to design systems that help that human as much as possible.
I completely agree with that. And as son of an engineer too, who was I think that's why I hate checklists so much.
Your dad's an engineer?
Yeah, my dad's a mechanical engineer. That explains so much.
That explains a lot.
Yeah.
About you.
Yeah, exactly.
The rebellious son.
I understand the value of processes because obviously I have seen the lack.
I just don't like to live by them.
But that's my Freudian thing. You get these ideas, and ideas have their own mind and force, and they permeate through an institution. And it's difficult then to, because I think they do have, and they should be the dominating force in certain aspects of it. Like, yeah, the process of getting a patient in and such, and like getting equipment and all that stuff. But the thing is, like, how do you stop it? Because there's a moment where that idea should have no place. There's a moment where you're making the life and death decision, and that idea of protocolization, I mean, I think has no place.
Well, I don't know. I think there's a purpose. Like, look at like algorithms for ACLS, right? Like, there's a reason there are algorithms for ACLS. Now, if you have a cardiologist in the room who's looking at the monitor and they're like, wait, don't shock this patient, then you have like one of the pillars of resilience in healthcare, which is deference to expertise. Yeah. But 95% of the patients that code, I made that number up, 95% of the patients that code may not have like a cardiology expert in the room. So there has to be a protocol, right? Like there has to be here's how we save most of the patients, and we can teach this to people and they can deploy it. And then you buy time to call for help, right? So I think it's that there's certainly like, I don't know that anybody would even practice medicine if everything we did was dictated by some rigid protocol. Like I certainly wouldn't. But what I think is fascinating is in the setting.
But isn't that where it's headed? Don't people talk about like doctors working for Amazon? Because I've heard that in academia.
Well, I mean,
we'll all be working for Amazon, and that's like I can shoot myself in the face right now if that happens.
I think before doctors
talk about your cynicism here.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, yes, we're all being bought out by
doctors work for Amazon. There will be AI doctor consults probably.
Yeah, and they'll work for Amazon.
But
anyway, potentially those will serve some purpose, and the bell will swing back the other way as well. So, like I think there is a place for protocolization of the things that help us teach, the things that help enforce kind of standards of care where they may be difficult to enforce. But I think, again, one of the pillars of resilience in healthcare is deference to expertise and understanding how people interact with systems to lead to the best outcomes for a patient, as opposed to like systematically, rigidly dictating how everything goes, because we know that actually doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Well, one of the things that I think, kudos to you for maneuvering is, imagine, Lucas and all his haterade being a vascular surgeon. Now imagine a cardiothoracic surgeon, because we all know that's next level of, and in an incredibly diplomatic way. And again, this is all hearsay because I get to join secretly behind the scenes and pass and fly by. Not that I'm paying any attention. I'm not compromising anybody's safety or security or privacy. I'm just saying it seems like there's a lot of management of personalities when you are, hey, I am a systems, in a way, optimizer. My job is to bring everybody to the table and, in a way, find some common ground in which we can all agree that as a whole, we need to do better because of those 3 a.m. calls, or because at that moment you need that wire and it's not there, then it all goes down to, the guy that had to order that wire, and maybe the guy that had to unpack the wire from the truck in the box downstairs. And so when you do performance rounds, it seems like it's an opportunity to dive into all this. And so tell me a little bit about, let's say, the complexities, 2 or 3 things that you've noticed are the hardest when you're trying to get a system, and not only a system, but all the humans in that system to align and collaborate, when a lot of them may have some very strong feelings about order, and they don't like this, or they don't like to even be part of this, or they feel it's a waste of time.
Yeah. No, I think, the things that we stay away from are the things that it sounds like Lucas worries about. Like I'm not here to be the principal, right? Like one of our key goals with performance rounds was like, we need a way to talk about not just every bad thing that happens, but also like, hi, all of you guys participate in so much complex care every day that goes well. Like we need to be able to highlight those things as well. So we all know like, hey, this went awesome and we should do this the next time, like it's an opportunity to do both of those things. So just a background, like Performance Rounds it's a conference we hold essentially weekly. And what we do is we take all of the procedures that happen in our heart center, in the ORs and the cath labs, and we review them. And there's a whole triage mechanism because that's a ton of procedures for us, but on which cases we talk about. But what sort of kind of rises up is like, we want to know how many of these types of procedures do we do? Is this something we do all the time? Is this something we do rarely? We have some benchmarks for like, hey, here's what usually happens. These types of kids stay in the house for like 4 days and then they go home, and whoa, this one stayed 15. What happened? And it's a learning conference. It's really a conference where you get to think about like, oh, I can tell you why this went sideways because, XYZ happened and here's what we needed and we didn't have. Or, hey, this went really well because all of these people came to the table to talk about this patient before they were born and we got everything set up that we needed. We should do that every time. And what it is for us is it's learning. It's learning about the system. I don't care what you did with the epinephrine. If you went up, you went down, I don't care. What I want to know is I couldn't titrate that epinephrine because I couldn't find a pharmacist on the unit. We need more pharmacists, like that kind of stuff.
Do you have, because it seems like a lot of this is admin. So is it only physicians and healthcare workers in it? Because by the way, to set the stage, and I think we're a little discombobulated in that sense, that Performance Round is a weekly 1 hour, right? It's 1 hour, 1 hour event where you essentially go through the caseload, right? You go through, hey, here's how many cases we did. Here's the standard cases we did, but then we select some and then we dive. And it may be a win and it may be a not so win.
And who's there?
But exactly. So who's at the table, and do you have non-healthcare providers also? Because sometimes I feel administration is responsible. Why don't we have more MAs? Why is there not more ultrasound techs at 2 a.m. that could do this and provide care?
Yeah, certainly leadership in the heart center is there, like nursing leadership, medical leadership, and most of the time someone from our admin leadership team is there as well, just because of those things. In now 2.5 years of doing this, I think what we identified is actually the operational stuff that comes up is not as much. It's already known. And by the time we get to these cases, which we go back 2 weeks caseload and then do it on the week. Does that make sense? Like we do the cases from 2 weeks ago. So that way you have some clinical data. In fact, a lot of them are discharged by then. So you've got kind of their full hospitalization, but the operational stuff, a lot of times it's already taken care of. Like, oh, hey, we need more temporary pacers. Like, okay, those are already on order. So sometimes the operational stuff is the easiest to fix, and that already gets fixed by Performance Rounds. So we'll get updates on that. A lot of what we end up discussing is around the safety of the patient. So events that happened that could have been avoided, equipment that malfunctioned, again, that gets taken care of pretty easily. So much around teaming, communication, availability of teams for each other. And I think I joke that it's a little bit like trauma bonding in there. Like it's a chance for us to be like really kind of candid with each other. Like, I think we should have talked about this more, or I think the family was very upset on how we communicated with them and we can do better next time. People are fairly genuine in that room. And I think it's taken a little bit of time to get there because like Lucas pointed out, you're taking people that don't like to be told what to do. And they certainly don't like to necessarily dwell on things that went wrong, because it happens a lot. Like we all carry a huge burden of taking care of really sick patients all the time. And so sometimes to rehash that is even harder.
So I have a question, practically speaking, because this gives me PTSD from back in training. God, yeah. M&M, right? Yeah. I mean, morbidity and mortality was the dreadful weekly event where you would have to come and essentially get naked in front of a public of 150 doctors, all of which they thought they are the smartest and the best, and they've never, ever had a complication. And you're there and you're saying, and so we punctured the lung, trying to put a subclavian axis. Yeah. And then we had to and then these guys just pontificate about how that's ridiculous. And you would feel shame. You would feel aberration, like all these things. And so do you forego M&M? Like, do you remove it with this more benign, more apparently empathetic and evolutionary way of seeing things as a system? Or is M&M still what it is and continues to be this like god-awful situation where everybody points fingers at everybody And then you have this other arena where these things happen. So how do you go about it and how you do it?
For a lot of our procedural specialists, like American College of Surgery, they sort of mandate that you have M&Ms in a, they don't mandate the format necessarily, but it's like still fairly traditional. Every mortality has to get looked at. We actually took mortalities out of this group because we have a separate M&M.
Okay.
And I will say that M&M is remarkably non-toxic, because
Really?
I think some of the principles that we learn in meetings like performance rounds, where we have guidelines, like you will be respectful, you will recognize that everybody in here is just trying to do the best in their job every day. So this is not a place where we lay blame. It's not a place where we rehash clinical decision-making that individuals made at the bedside when they were in a stressful situation, trying to take care of these really sick kids. But it is a place where we can look for team learning. Where could we have communicated better? Where could we have worked together a little bit more fluidly as a team? How did we do with our transitions of care from units to units or ORs or cath labs or whatever? Like, that kind of system-based stuff, that's what we want to look at. Do you have the resources you need? Was the palliative care team available? Did you call them? Like, those sorts of conversations, those are appropriate for this forum, because that's where our learning is, and those are things that we can fix. That traditional model of M&M where you fall on your sword for that complication that you had, and you don't really think about it more than like, this complication happened to me, and everybody's like, well, that would never happen to me. Like, that has no place really, I don't think, in how we practice medicine anymore. The key word you used there was shame. Like, as parents, we know that kids don't learn that way. Like, that's not an appropriate way to teach people how to be better. It's just a good way to make them feel bad. And so
You think?
Yeah, right.
There's no space for suffering in learning.
Suffering, yes. Shame, no. I mean,
well, it's going on a spectrum of the same. Like one of the things that I think about sometimes if I'm going to do anything and I'm having a thought, it's like, should I do this or should I do that? It's like, sometimes I think, what would, like, my program director is Dr. Amy Goldberg. She's like yay tall, but I've never been so afraid of somebody in my life, and I think it's like, okay, what would Amy Goldberg
what would she say
in Eminem if I did this? And that is like a guiding light.
Is it really?
Yeah, it is.
That's shame, or is that the voice that keeps you from making
of reason in a way?
Irrational decisions.
She's now like very high up there, so I'm not gonna say it, but she wasn't like she was a tough cookie. How about that? How about that? And I was listening to this audiobook, and there's something called the Lindy effect. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
There's this restaurant or shop in New York City called the Lindy, and they supposedly made a really good cheesecake. And some academics went there and they came up with this term called the Lindy effect, to the fact that the longer an idea lasts is predictive of how long it will last. So if an idea lasts 2 weeks, the chance of it lasting another 2 weeks is pretty high. If it's lasted 50 years, the chances that it's going to last another 50 years is pretty high. I'm butchering it. This was like, Nassim Taleb wrote this book called Skin in the Game, and he describes it much better than I just did. But it makes a lot of sense to me. I think.
But in the sense of what? What in relation to what?
To the concept of M&M. How long has the concept of M&M been around and served a function? So the concept of M&M,
meaning that you're supportive of the necessity of having these.
Yeah, it's like the biggest learning. It's like the most learning I ever did.
Well, my last M&M, I want to say, was maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah,
I have not been in an M&M.
I love it
in a long time. I think M&Ms now look very different than they did when I was training, and it was being like, "This was my fault. I did it. Throw your tomatoes."
Yeah.
Now it's more like, okay, this happened, and I understand I am not shirking the responsibility for this complication, but let's think about how we prevent this from happening again. Like, there's that like better analysis.
No,
it doesn't stop at shame, right?
Yeah.
Ownership is one thing. Vulnerability to say like, yeah, this was on me, or somebody else to be like, hey, this really sucked and I wish you hadn't done that. Yeah. There's a way to do that respectfully. And I think that is still a very important part.
But I'm going to respectfully disagree. I bet you that there are very toxic programs across America.
Oh, it's still happening.
Where M&M is a throw of tomatoes show.
What is more toxic than you making a mistake and somebody having a really bad effect from it. I mean, you need to
No. There's
deal.
absolutely, self.
Life is
And do you
toxic.
need to carry that shame into a public, like, I guess it's the whipping boy part of it that I don't understand. Like, why do I need to be up here for you guys to throw tomatoes? Like, I already feel I'm not a sociopath. I feel terrible about
Because,
this.
Yeah,
because it's an act,
look,
it's
we
an
all
act of
carry.
extreme responsibility, which I think we should always like. We should have responsibility as I think as interventionalists to an extreme.
I think everybody in
And I
healthcare, we
think,
have our closet of
yeah,
little memories
no,
of
we
things
do.
that we know. If I would
They
have,
shape the
could
way
have,
you practice. They
Huh?
shape the way you practice.
they
Every
shape the
Yeah.
way you practice.
Yeah, and
100%.
they should.
100%. I'll tell you this, every time I see a uber calcified small little aorta, I immediately think of one case where I had a perf and it was like went south very fast.
Yeah.
And I remember like if it was yesterday when she looked at me starting the procedure and said, "Am I going home today?" And I said, "Yes, you are." Yeah, I'm going to put discharge orders.
Yeah.
And this is now 15 years later.
Yeah.
Every single time I'm starting to poke that case, my heart rate goes up.
Yeah.
And I immediately think of her voice.
Yeah.
But I don't think that got in any way remediated by going through an M&M and having to tell all these old guys and how they said that they would have never done that, because if they would have done open surgery, I would have never done that with a stent.
Isn't it like a ritual? Isn't it like a ritual we have to go through? Like when a kid is 6
to
years
Shreya's
old
point, I hope that they've changed, and I hope there are programs that they have changed.
It's
I
not
don't
like
know
we
that.
don't do it. We do it. And there's a reason we do it, because there's so much learning to happen there, right? Not just for, say, the proceduralist who did that case. Trust me, by the time it gets to an M&M meeting, they've already had 70 conversations, right? But I think that aspect of shame where you're like, well, I would never. I mean, yes, you would. We all do. We all do.
Yeah, we all do. We all do.
Out of the woods, right?
No, yeah.
You're going to go into 9 calcific aortas and it's going to have worked out. And then the 10th one explodes. And you're like, well, I didn't do anything differently that time. Like, it's just a crappy protoplasm, right? So, I think to heap shame upon that is like dumb. Now, if you're having a conversation that's like, how was your approach and what could we have done differently? And, would you think about doing something differently the next time? Or what resources did you need that you didn't have? It allows that person to think, how can I change this, right? When we think of traditional M&Ms back in the day, they were just like, you, bad, done. They weren't. Now it's more like, okay, well, that whole thing goes down again. How are you going to do things differently next time? And that's where the learning is. So it's that, I think. It's not, I agree that there's a lot of room for self-reflection. There's a lot of room for responsibility. I don't think there's room for shame.
Is there any objective performance goals that can validate your quest here of this journey that not self-appointed, that you've been appointed to be the leader and the director of this program? It's multi-specialty, multi-systemic. You're trying to push the needle. You are by the way, #1 hospital in cardiovascular care in America. I mean, Texas Children is phenomenal and amazing. So you're clearly doing something wrong. I mean, right. But Freudian slip, right? No, you're clearly doing something right.
I think we're always.
How do you objectivize where this performance thing that we're doing, and we're investing time is pushing the needle in this way? So do you have research, abstracts? What production is there, if any, to tell any naysayers or any haters, no, this is exactly what we need to be doing? And look at where we were here. Look at where we're now. Like, where have you measured the effect of doing this and bringing everybody up to the table?
We've used this as a platform for a lot of things, right? There's case analysis, and that's kind of the biggest one, but it's also an opportunity for people to have candid conversations. So in the background, we're always sort of like thinking of like sort of the psychological aspects of teaming that happen during this place where we create a space for people to have conversations. And we're also thinking of like, what changes are we putting into place as a result of conversations that we've had in here that are affecting our patient outcomes over the long term? So we track a number of things. We track who's speaking in the room. Is it just like a surgeon speaks up and then every case a surgeon spoke up and nobody else said anything? That's not like a hospitable environment. You're not really creating a space where people can talk. But, do we have junior people talking? Do we have non-physicians talking? Are we like creating a place where people can say like, oh, actually there's a project happening on that. And so there's some awareness that's being shared. So we track who's kind of speaking in the room. We look at the follow-up items that are generated from these conversations. So again, like, okay, we need more temporary pacemakers. We'll put it on a list and we'll follow up. Like, did these pacemakers get ordered? Great. Did that problem kind of get solved? Or at least addressed in kind of the near time. So we have projects that have been generated. There are like data polls that have been generated, and we keep kind of a list of running kind of follow-up items from this conference that we refer back to and kind of keep moving as kind of the quality work that our heart center does. And then the big picture outcomes, it's really hard to say that the one conference where we're talking about stuff has changed our mortality rates, right? Those are like very multifactorial. There's a ton of stuff that goes into that. But we watch things like our overall length of stay for these patients. If you hear that X surgeons, VSDs all get out in 3 days, but you're like, hey, my VSDs are taking 6 days to get out. And in performance rounds, you're hearing, well, extubated on post-op day 0, chest tubes out on post-op day 1, and by post-op day 3, they were out of bed, left the hospital on Lasix. You start thinking like, oh, maybe I need to be doing that to my patient. So we've actually seen a little bit more standardization in our post-operative care because of this. And for a couple of lesions, it's actually like the more predictable postoperative care has decreased our length of stay a little. And I won't attribute that directly to performance rounds, but I think the awareness of sort of like what other people are doing, what the right hand's doing, what the left hand's doing in a space like that helps people be like, oh, this is the way we do things. And that's something we've kind of like focused on a little bit as well.
So if you had to do this all over again, meaning, let's go, when did you get hired for this?
Post-pandemic, so like 2020, well, maybe 2019, maybe right before.
All right, so this is now about like 2 or 3 years. I'm just wondering,
we
with
started
what your experience has been, would you take the job again? If let's say we go on a time machine knowing what you know now, would you take this job again? Are you in love with the commission that you've had, and would you do it all over again? And if so, would you do it? Maybe yes, but you do it a little bit different.
I think we've learned a lot. This conference has evolved a ton since we started. It's our own little quality improvement project where we have different things that we'll try out and we'll see if they stick or not, or if they improve things. So the way it looked in 2020 when we really took it over to the way it looks now, very different. And a lot of that is like, okay, well, what is the audience getting from this? Like, what do you guys need as members of this heart center who are taking care of our patients from this conference? Do you need us to sit here and like rehash everything with these patients? Do you want more about like, how many of these do we see a year and what's their average course or whatever? What do you need from this? So I think that kind of constant work on improving how people interact with this conference and what it does for them has changed a lot over the last 3 years. If I had to do it again, what would I do? I think so much of the early part of doing this was us figuring out how to talk to each other. That took a while. How to like really sort of be candid, how to feel like you were safe to say stuff in that space. We moderate the discussion when it starts sort of like going sideways into blame territory. We have to bring it back a little bit. And so there's a moderator on all of these. There's 4 of us that kind of take turns doing it. It's mostly me. But I know I keep trying, but it's at like 7 a.m. on a Tuesday and people are like, I'm busy. But it's good. I mean, I think it's one of our highest attended conferences in the Heart Center, even after like 3 years. And I think people get a lot out of it, whether it's like, okay, good, we did talk about that because I thought that thing was going to happen. We were just going to brush it under the rug and never talk about it. Like now, it's coming to performance rounds. We'll have a conversation. Maybe it won't be like the grenades you wanted to throw, but we're not going to do that here. And if you got some grenades, we can take it offline, so that kind of stuff I think has helped with teaming a lot. And I don't know that having done it differently, we would have gotten there any faster. I think that just takes us getting in a room and getting used to talking to each other virtually. If I had to do it again, I think I would have the workload for
maybe even connect that to, there's a facility, there's so many hospitals in the US dealing with complex diseases, including what Lucas said, what we deal with, limb preservation. And we're trying to do this, and we want your advice. So let's say you're talking to yourself before, but also you're talking to us and saying, as you build your performance rounds teams and you're having to create this, what would be maybe a few tips that you could give us here as we're wrapping up the hour and giving you your time back so you could go back to your family and your patients? But what would you give us as advice in trying to maneuver beginning these programs from zero?
Yeah, I would work backwards from the things that you want to accomplish. So teaming and being able to talk to each other, that was a big one for us. So we focused really hard on like open conversations, moderating things when it got a little dirty. Like the other thing I would do is triage the outcomes that are important to you. So if you have areas that you're focused on, postoperative discharge after limb preservation, spend your time analyzing those patients. Don't do every, run of the mill other case that you can triage in a way that makes the time that you spend on this the most effective for you and what you're looking for. And then the other thing that I think is really important is showing people that the conversations that they have in that space are meaningful and result in some change. And that's not everything. I'm not going to take every little problem and design some crazy solution for it because it's not necessary. But like the big things that come up recurrently, the themes that you're seeing, having a visible way to show people that the conversations they have are worthwhile and will actually change the environment that they work in some positive way based on their feedback, that is a huge win. So having, very intentional follow-up on some of the items that come through and
Do you
work.
do that personally or do you send an email? Do you call them and say,
Both.
hey, like what you heard, like what you said is
Yeah.
really impactful, or do you send an email?
Yeah, no, we say we do it objectively. Like, thank you. That's actually, we're going to take that offline and we will bring it back once we have a better, conversation around it, because we're not going to solve the problem in that like 1 hour meeting while we're trying to talk about 25 other cases. But what we can do is we'll be the ones responsible for kind of setting up a way for this team to get together with this team, hash that out. And in 6 months, when they've figured out some process that works for them, 3 months, 1 month, whatever, they're going to come back to this forum and say, hey, here's what we learned based on those cases. And this is what we've done differently. And that I think is really meaningful.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. Thank you so
Well,
much.
we're going to let you get back to A, your family, and B, your patients. And from both Lucas and from I,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Fun.
I
Thanks
learned
for
so
having me.
much.
Thank you
Yeah.
for being in our show number 1. It's been a
Yeah.
success. You've been super easy to talk to. And I'm sure everybody that's listening is going to take this and enjoy it as much as we did.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Shreya.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me, guys.
Bye-bye.